This meeting is being recorded.
And you're on.
Bossy little person, isn't she? Thank you. Good evening. We've already started the meeting in open session before going into executive session, and now we're reconvening in open session. Per Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, that's Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the public will not be allowed to physically access this school committee meeting. Members of the public can access the meeting via Montague Community Television broadcast. The extension of the emergency open meeting law provisions were signed into law as Chapter 20, Section 20 of the Acts of 2021. The school committee reserves the right to implement additional remote participation procedures and will notify the public of these procedures as it is practical to. And members of the public are welcome to join the meeting by accessing the link on the Gill-Montague Regional School District website. It can be found under School Committee Notices and Agendas for upcoming meetings, and it will have tonight's date for the school committee meeting there. We are live streaming as well as broadcasting on MCTV, and a recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on MCTV and the district website. So I'd like to welcome any of our visitors. This would be the opportunity for public participation, which is policy BEDH that has been reinstated to hold public participation remotely, but we don't seem to have anyone this evening wishing to do that. So therefore, we'll continue. If you are in the audience, the Zoom audience, just please remember to keep your camera and your microphone off. Thank you. Brian, important events?
Thank you. So next Wednesday, March 22nd, is an early release day for professional development across the district. Again, as in the last meeting, I wanted to remind people that the Turners Falls High School extravaganza will be held next Thursday evening from 5 to 6:30. The Friends of Sheffield Bingo for Books event will take place on Friday, March 26th at 6 p.m. in the Sheffield cafeteria. Friends of Sheffield meet on Monday, March 27th at 6 in the Sheffield Teachers Room. Gill Elementary School Kindergarten Open House and Registration is on Tuesday, March 28th at 5:30 p.m. Hillcrest Elementary School Kindergarten Open House and Registration will be on Thursday, March 30th at 5:30 p.m. That there is a flu and COVID vaccine clinic being held on Friday, March 31st from 4 to 7 p.m. at the Montague Senior Center. And the Turners Falls High School production of Hairspray begins on Friday, March 31st with a 7 p.m. performance. On Saturday, April 1st, there are two shows, one at 2 in the afternoon and one at 7 at night. And then again, a Sunday matinee at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. And next would be a student representative report. Heather, is Sina with us this evening or is she not?
No, nothing new since we met just last week.
Yes, it wasn't that long ago. Thank you. I always like to check in though. Business and operations report, Joanne, please. I'm sorry, superintendent's report. I skipped right over your other part. Sorry, Brian.
Sorry, as you can see, it's a very brief report. I knew that if I put something in the public about the calendar and the changes to this school year calendar, that we'd have another snow day, and sure enough, I cursed us. So I'm going to take the risk again, but just wanted to let folks know that we now have 5 snow days, and the last day of school for students is now June 22nd, and Friday, June 23rd is the last day for staff. I did also want to let the committee know that Patricia Kinsella, who's the Pioneer Valley Regional Superintendent, joined me over at Turners Falls High School. We went on the tour with the 2 student groups, one from our high school and one from a group of 15 students from Pioneer who came over. They were then put into small groups and then came back all together to have a discussion about the possibility of regionalization. And I thought the students from both schools collaborated exceptionally well. They were extremely thoughtful, and both Patricia and I were deeply impressed by the students' comments, thoughts, and suggestions. And I look forward to going over and spending some more time with Patricia and our kids over at Pioneer next week. And then the next date for when school committee will meet with our students will be Friday, April 7th at 9:10 a.m. and that will be remotely. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, business and operations report, Joanne?
Okay, I'm going to skip over the items that you're going to talk about under business. So the budget
Yeah.
and the transportation reimbursement fund. I can talk about school bus walk zones. So Jennifer had called me and asked about elementary walk zones for our Montague Elementary School because our downtown area doesn't get a bus to our Sheffield or Hillcrest Elementary. And we've talked about this at school committee before. You know, it was years ago, and maybe Jane, you may have been on the committee at the time when we talked about it, but we haven't made a change to our school committee policy to change the 1.5 miles, just because it's much more complicated than just adding a bus for one section of town. So I am going to share my screen after I find my file. Okay. I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm just going to walk you through this. I added it. Right? Okay. Now, if I can just make this a little bigger. Whoops. Oh, gee. Okay. So the picture here with the yellow shows where our walk zone is. And the two hearts in the middle are the two elementary schools. So it's a pretty big area what that walk zone is. And there's about 220 kids that live within that zone. So, and I also wanted to share that 1.5 mile walk zone is pretty standard walk zone around the state. So I looked at the neighborhoods of where students live. And so I broke it down into these various areas: the downtown area, the elementary neighborhood, the hill. So anybody that lives on the hill up on top, and then mid-hill, anybody that lives coming up the hill on any one of the roads that's coming up. And then Montague City in the patch. So it would be Montague City Road in the patch, and then the neighborhood around the secondary school. And there are other areas that would also fit within these numbers, which I just couldn't include everything as I was putting this together. So right now the policy is 1.5 miles. So if we say, okay, we're going to transport everybody that lives at least a mile from the school, that really wouldn't add a lot of kids to our buses, as you can see from this chart on the left. We would have to say anybody a half a mile and more would get bused. And then we would add a lot of students. But it's not just the students that live downtown. It's students that live in other areas as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the financial impact of reimbursement on transportation. So if we have a bus that costs $76,000, which is about what one of our buses cost, and we have 50 riders on that bus, and all of them are eligible for transportation, then we would get the full reimbursement, which is expected to be 90%. So our net cost for that bus would be $7,600. Then we build in the cost for the bus, and then we build in the reimbursement cost when we're looking at our budget. So there's money on the revenue side and there's money on the expense side. So both of those numbers would be in there. Now, if we added 50 riders to that bus that were not eligible for transportation, instead of a net cost of $7,600 for that bus, it would be $4,100. So that's a pretty significant increase. Now, if we had to add a bus and none of the students were reimbursable, then it would be an added cost of $76,000 with no extra reimbursement. So when we think about our transportation, here's one of the complications. I took a measurement from both Hillcrest and Sheffield down to the corner of 3rd and L Street, which you would think would be far enough to get transportation. But it is about 0.9 miles, so less than a mile to get to Hillcrest, and 0.7 to get to Sheffield. Right, so if you want to have transportation that's 1 mile from the schools, there's a lot of kids in the downtown area that would not get a bus. And then we would have to look at the other areas of town between 1 mile and 1.5 miles. And so I did a measurement over from Hillcrest and from Sheffield, or from Hillcrest over to the high school, and then from Hillcrest down Turnpike Road, the other direction on Turnpike Road, just at the top of the hill right before Walnut Street. And both of those are just over a mile. So those kids that live in those areas would get a bus before the downtown students if we were doing this based on miles. But then to be equitable, we should also look at our secondary students who walk to school. And so this map is showing on the left, it's showing from the high school to Randallwood Drive. That's a walker, 1.3 miles. And then we're also showing Dell Street. So if a student lives on Dell Street, that would be about 1.1 miles. So again, that student would get a bus before a downtown student would get a bus if we're looking at mileage when we're talking about transportation. And then I looked at the transportation reimbursement. So this is our historical transportation cost for regular ed transportation and our reimbursement and what that percentage rate has been over the years. If you see fiscal 2010 is highlighted, in that year, the state reduced the transportation reimbursement by 30%. So we were getting 85%, and then in fiscal 2010, they dropped it down to under 60%. So that cost the district $100,000 in lost revenue. I don't know if they adjusted the bus routes then or not, but that was a lot of money. So that is the cost of lost revenue when the reimbursement rate can change. So I looked at other options for transportation, right? There's different options. You can add some students to our buses that are already coming through town to pick up from a mile out. Half a mile out would be difficult because then it'd just be really hard to pick up students within half a mile of the school. Just because of the bus routes and because of the sheer numbers of students. And then there would be no reimbursement. So the cost would go up significantly and the reimbursement would stay flat or even go down. So options is about 25 or 30 years ago. Gill-Montague had double bus runs. So they were picking up, I think it was a mile from the school. I'm not really sure. My kids were young and we lived about a mile from the school and there was a bus in front of our house. But there was also a double bus run. So after my kids were dropped off at school, they were supervised by some staff and the bus left again, picked up kids downtown and brought them back to the school. And that at some point went away somewhere around 25 or 30 years ago. So that is an option, but in that option would require negotiating the teacher and possibly pair of contracts to have a different start time for the day because the timing in between the start time for high school and for elementary really doesn't fit. But it's an option to discuss. But changing the mileage reimbursement or the transportation reimbursement from 1.5 miles to a mile out doesn't really solve our problem if our problem is a certain neighborhood. So it's a conversation that we've had. at school committee, and I wanted to bring it to you because I'm going to the finance committee tomorrow to talk about it. And I just wanted you to all have it first, but we can discuss transportation more at a later meeting. I just wanted to put it on your plate so you have that. So one of the suggestions that I had given Jennifer, I just didn't realize that you were going to run with it quite so quickly, was, possibility would be for the town to pay for buses. If they want to bus students from a certain area, then if the town wanted to pick that up, that's something. But if we pick that up and we say we only want to bus from one neighborhood, it makes it's just not equitable to the other families that live close to the school as well. And so adding transportation for all of our students down to a half a mile to make sure that we're getting neighborhoods pockets would be quite expensive.
Okay, I see a couple hands, but just before, I wasn't sure if you mentioned it, Joanne, or not. The reason we and most districts use the 1.5 mile limit is because that's what the state has decided to reimburse, correct?
That's right.
Okay,
And
I
that's,
was,
as long as I can remember, that has been the mileage that the state reimburses on.
okay. I saw Nick and then Jennifer.
I was just wondering if we recently tried to work with the FRTA to see if they maybe have some capacity to help us out with at least the downtown kids.
Way back in the olden days, we did have a town bus that made a loop through Hillcrest when I was teaching there and a loop through Sheffield. The problem that became was was a town bus and any adults could be riding on it. So it seemed a little tricky to have students get on a bus where we didn't have any control over who was on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's ideal. I was just saying that is a possible solution to.
Yeah, I mean, ideally,
When I
if
was
they
in school, there was an FRTA bus that would, at least from the middle and high schools that you could get on.
Yeah.
You lived, too close for busing, but really too far to reasonably walk.
right, it did, they might have done the middle and high school too. I just remember with the little kids, it did sometimes. Jennifer?
Yeah. Wow. So first, where is that PowerPoint? I didn't see it in the notes. I was looking at all the notes earlier. I didn't see it there, and I'd love to have that for the meeting
No,
tomorrow.
it's a link in my report.
Okay, because I'm in the report now and I don't see it. So maybe I'll go in there again.
Yeah, if you go in and refresh,
Okay.
it's in
cool.
there now.
And so a bit ago, I learned that there was no downtown bus without knowing what the downtown bus was. So there was a bus when my niece was in kindergarten, and then there was a sort of devastation occurring, or not devastation, but like some challenges. And I was like, can she take the bus? And they're like, there's no bus. I was like, okay, there's no bus. Where'd the bus go? And so that brings up this whole thing is like elementary school students shouldn't have to work so hard to get to school if there are other obstacles that, period. And so I had a long conversation with Joanne, and I probably didn't retain all of the things because there's a lot of things that she knows and y'all know that I don't know. And it seemed like a very expensive fix or no fix, whatever. So it sort of paused. And then I was in a finance committee meeting, and I learned that, well, I sort of knew this before, but it was reiterated that we pay a bunch of thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars for a choice student who used to go to Smith Folk, who moved to Montague. And I learned recently that that's a state mandate. So like, or whatever the word is, statutory, whatever. So I apologize. I almost never have the correct language. But so what I saw was in that meeting, I said, well, wait a second, we're going to pay $32,000 to bring one student or to like make sure this one student goes to this one program. Why don't maybe the town can take on the bus thing and again, this is elementary school. So that would be like pre-K to 5, I guess, right? That's what our elementary school does now. That seems like, especially on the low end of that, a high priority to be helpful to get them to school. Joanne's right with all the equitable bits. Like, of course, I don't mean just downtown. It's just like there was a downtown bus and then there wasn't a downtown bus. So there was a point at which that became not a thing, which was the trigger for me to even look into this. So I think elementary school students should not have to work hard to get to school. I mean, no student should, but we could assume that maybe a 14-year-old can walk a mile and a half and maybe a 5-year-old can't, or easily, you know? And then anyway, so I learned that the Smith Folk thing was a state mandate. So it kind of blows that out of the water, but it doesn't change the fact that I think that students should not have to work that hard to get to school. And I like Nick's idea, and I like this idea of thinking out of the box. So I send an email to, Steve, town administrator, and I say, hey, can the town consider this expense if the district can't cover it? And, he's helpful, and he says it's going to, talks to Joanne, it's going to cost $160,000. My instinct is, well, maybe we can get more creative with our solutions and not just jump to $160,000 spend for the town, which would probably come out of taxation. So I feel like there's got to be, as Joanne did in her presentation, there might be some rerouting, which bus policy, I guess that's Brian's gig. So it's one of these things where I sort of felt, impassioned to talk more about it, and then it sort of got ahead of me. And but I still think that I believe in it. Like I believe in it. I think that elementary school transportation feels like it should be a priority for the town and for the district. And my guess is there's probably money somewhere, money/creative planning to sort of arrive at a solution. Sorry, that was a lot of talking. Thank you.
Thanks. Just going back to that buses were and not, did we bus differently during COVID?
Right. During COVID, we had to limit the number of kids on the bus. And then it was at the end of COVID, when we were looking back at the transportation, that we said, we think the reason that the kindergarten bus was for half a mile or more was because when kindergarten used to be a half a day. Right. And it's just a policy that had been in the school committee policy that just never changed. Now, we have families that go to kindergarten and they're on a bus. And then the next year, they don't get a bus, and they don't understand why, because this child is 6, not 5. They can't walk to school any more than the 5-year-old could walk to school alone. And so why didn't they get a bus? So rather than put that back in after the pandemic, we didn't put the half-mile kindergarten bus back in. It's not like we were busing them midday because they're in kindergarten. So the kindergarten busing is the same as everybody else now. And that changed after the pandemic.
Okay, thanks. John?
So double busing, Joanne, does that mean that you would have half the number of drivers and half the number of buses, but the busing schedule would take twice as long in the morning and the afternoon? And that'd be savings not from salary, because the work hours would be the same, but from the number of buses that would need to be rented from Cosmescus or maintained?
No, there would be no savings. There would be a cost to it, but the buses would do what they do now. All the buses, they're picking up about, if they're picking up 200 kids, they drop them off at the school, and then they would leave and they would go downtown and they would pick up one group of kids at one bus stop and come back to the school.
So this would be a short period of time.
It'd just be maybe 2 buses, maybe 3 buses would have to drop at the school. The kids would be supervised. The buses would leave, pick up in one spot, and then come back. So it's a real quick pickup and drop off. And all 3 buses, if all 3 buses are doing that, and there's a cost per bus per day that they would add on, because you're paying for the person who's driving the bus and you're paying for the extra gas, you pay based on the mileage. So there would be an added cost. And I haven't checked into all of that. This is not something that we could implement this year. It is something that would have to go in effect in another year, because we would need quite a bit of time to plan this. We'd have to revise all of the existing routes to stop within the half mile of school at different intervals. And then we would have to negotiate the teacher contract to change their start time, because we just wouldn't be able to do it in between the start time of the 2 schools. There'd be a lot to it, but the cost would be less than the 160. But there's a lot of negotiating and adjustments to be done just to get there. And
That did exist way back as well, but I think that was when we had a larger number of students living in the town and the classes were larger. I was teaching when they did have double runs. And I think it might have been maybe the paraprofessionals, teaching assistants, who were in charge of the students while they were waiting.
Right. Yeah, that's my thought also. And it was when my older kids were young, so it would have
Yeah, I
been
think the
around.
buses would have been overcrowded and we couldn't have brought them all at once. I think
Right.
that was why that happened.
Okay. And I know, Nick, also that we did have some conversations with FTRA, and I believe a few years ago, they adjusted their bus route so they would go by the high school, but not to the elementary schools. I don't remember them going to elementary schools. And as Jane had said, that would be a little sticky to have those buses. I mean, potentially we could, they may need to add a bus to do that, right? If we had a lot of people getting on the bus with their kids and then having to get dropped back off after they brought them in, that would be a lot of people to be added to a town bus. Probably not effective for them to pick up 100 kids downtown or 100 people.
Bill?
I'm wondering if you think, for one, I think picking up, extending the program to the elementary kids does not jeopardize equity between if you don't pick up the secondary kids. That's my opinion, because I think the secondary kids can handle it, and that's not, at least that's not my focus as to why I'd want to pick up the young kids instead of older ones. But then secondly, there probably is an argument out that the transportation enhances attendance, and not eliminating the chance of being distracted on the way to school would be eliminated. And the issue of having the double busing, we're clearly exchanging a cost for paying people to oversee the children that are dropped at school first, versus having the kids have a longer bus ride and not get off the bus until the bus was full, type of thing. So that would be picking up the same number of kids, but without the intermediate stop at the elementary school to let kids off. Those are my thoughts on it.
Thanks,
Right.
Bill.
The problem is the kids wouldn't all fit on the buses, and that's why they would have to drop off. We wouldn't be able to fit them.
Get a bigger bus.
Even with a bigger bus. We go, I'll talk, I can talk to Kosmaskis and we can see if we can get 3 kids in a seat.
But some of those electric buses that Pioneer Valley.
Oh, with the double where they turn in the middle? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would go well.
Love that. Yeah. Anyone else on that right now? And we certainly can come back to it, as Joanne said.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to make a point. I think this is probably in other people's minds, but just want to say it that this is also for parents, that getting a kid to school, if you are having to drive them, and I'm not sure exactly what the start time is, but it can compromise your ability to be at work on time and makes your life a lot more complicated, or take care of whatever you need to do. So this is something that's not just getting kids to school, has the benefit that you're talking about, Bill, too, around supporting attendance, but it also has kind of a broader social good support. So I would hope that the town would be interested in supporting, if that is part of the conversation, just supporting the economy of the town by enabling parents, probably mostly mothers, who take on the burden of this transport. So just wanted to kind of put that point out there. And then about I'm glad you brought up the point about equity for secondary students. I also don't think that is super relevant. Equity doesn't mean everybody needs to get the same thing. It means that the people get what they need most. And I think this is a case where secondary students are, for the most part, able to get to school. And I assume the ones that need special accommodations there is a special bus for those students. So I don't think we need to overcomplicate it. And I think focusing on elementary makes sense. And then similarly, I was wondering, Joanne, if you could go back to the one of your earlier slides where you kind of broke down the students who live farther away versus ones that live closer. Like the different for a student who lives a mile or mile and a half, that's a lot longer of a walk or a bike ride or a car ride through traffic than the students who live at half mile. And I didn't follow why that just focusing on the farther out students, why we're not just zooming in on that. Like if it is so expensive, why not just focus on the farther out students? That seems to be the biggest issue. And then the ones that are closer, that's obviously a shorter distance to make and probably has less burden to families. Jennifer?
I think Joanne was saying too, that chart seemed to indicate that that there were less people further away, that there were like the numbers of the, like were 7 for 1 to 1.5, and then like 25 for 0.5 to 9 or something like 0.5 to 0.9. I agree with everything you're saying. I was just thinking like if it were reversed, it would make it a better argument.
Right.
Like it's not enough impact. Impact wouldn't be
fair point.
enough to focus on that farther away group. I wonder if there's a neighborhood though that could have a walking route established. I've seen school districts where there's like, I don't know what happens now at school drop-off time, but where there's kind of like an adult at a corner and another adult at the next corner, and they have white gloves and a flag. And it's like, you can just kind of shove your kid out the door and they'll make it there on, safely. So if there's an area that, then we're not trying to get everybody, but are there ways to like narrow the pool so we're not trying to get everybody, but I don't know, going around the idea of like creative solutioning.
Right. Just pre-COVID, funny these things come up. There was something called the walking school bus, and it used to pick up where the 2nd Street Bakery used to be on 4th Street, and adults from the school, Sheffield, Hillcrest, and sometimes school committee members. I did it on a couple of occasions, and grandparents or parents that were available would walk with students from that area, so they knew they had other students to walk with and adults helping supervise crossing. That was just kind of a voluntary thing that people did, and then COVID hit, and I don't think it's started up again. Has it, Joanne?
No, I don't believe it has.
Because it was
over the course of from the summer really up through now, our family outreach coordinator, Stacy Langneck, has done an enormous amount of work with the Mass Department of Transportation to try to sort of restart that. And she had very few families ultimately who were interested. The meeting that she held was not very well attended. So that's an indication that there are some families or perhaps more families that had figured it out thereafter. But I know Stacy's going to persist in trying to keep that on our plate.
Oh, good. And I did it occurred to me too, as we were talking, there has been concern other years about some of the areas up on top of the hill where students were walking not necessarily a really long way, but there weren't sidewalks in those areas. And I know Joanne was able to work with the town when they were putting in more sidewalks. And I think, Joanne, out of 3 that you asked for, we got 2?
Yes. Yep.
Which
so we have a sidewalk.
Yeah.
We have a sidewalk now that goes the length of Turnpike Road. And so we have a lot of students that would walk on Turnpike Road to go to the high school, but also on Turnpike Road before they would get to Dell Street to go to the elementary schools. And then there's also a sidewalk on Montague Street that it extends all the way to the fire station. Mm-hmm. So those are 2 areas that we now have sidewalks. The other area that I had put on my request for sidewalks was on Turner's Falls Road, leaving the fire station, heading to Randall Road. So that was the last one. And that would have gotten another pretty good chunk of students that are walkers to school. Mm. So, Christina, if I can go back to the mileage. So the reason that I was focused a little bit more on the half mile to 0.9 was because those are the students that live downtown. those are the students that we're trying to transport to school. And they're not a mile from school for the most part. There are some that are a mile from school, but most of them are less than a mile.
And why can't they walk? I mean, I think of the kids in the patch. That's a long way to walk. So I get that. Why can't they walk if they're downtown? Can you just elaborate on that thinking?
They do walk. A lot of them walk. Families walk. They have babies. It's snowing. It's raining. They're walking. They're pushing the stroller up the hill twice
Yeah.
a day to bring their kids to school. And so some of the families don't have transportation that live in that area. You know, there are reasons that we would look at that area for transportation and want to get those students onto a bus. And so it might be short, but I think the hill complicates things. There are sidewalks, but you know, it's not that's the place that we struggle the most with transportation.
It's burdensome.
Right. And
Yeah.
students
Okay.
in,
Thank
at
you.
the secondary school that live downtown, they get a bus because it's a mile and a half.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's why we're focused on that shorter amount of time or amount of mileage. If we just went to the mile, we're not solving the problem that we're here talking about.
Jennifer?
Thank you. When I was looking at the bus policy for the state, they indicated 2 miles, I guess the requirement. So I was, I guess, happy and curious to hear why they give money for 1.5 miles out, whether the state policy seems to be 2 miles. I was just curious about that.
Yeah. I guess I
think
always
that
thought it
is
was
for the municipal schools. So a municipal school,
I was looking
city-
at regional schools, but maybe you're right. Maybe I was looking at
right,
the
a
wrong
municipal school that's not regionalized, they don't even have to transport their secondary students. They only have to transport their elementary students, and maybe the 2 miles is the amount for them. I know there's schools out there that have a single bus in their whole district. So, you know, those are some smaller communities with really neighborhood schools. 2 miles might be the requirement, even if it is regional. But they're saying, we'll reimburse you as long as you're not transporting less than a mile. But if somebody lives 2 miles from the school, you must provide transportation.
I see. Well, I am super grateful for all this conversation and the extra effort. Thank you.
okay. Thanks. Very good. Moving on. School committee reports. Warrant subcommittee.
Jane,
Did I see? Yep.
I had a couple other things.
Oh, I'm sorry. And your report. Yep.
Right. Sorry, that one lasted a while. So budget transfers for November and December, those are just for your information. They don't need approval. If there was something in there that did need approval, you've already approved it.
Okay.
And then I have the GIC update. So the GIC did put out their rates, and the average increase for a non-Medicare plan, so non-Medicare plan would be for our active employees and also our retirees that are under 65 or our retirees that have never paid into Medicare. And those would be, they were here a long time ago. They're been retired for quite a while. And then the Medicare plans, the average increase was 2.3%. So the 5.7 is higher than how we budgeted. And so our insurance costs are going to be rather tight this year, especially because Health New England, which is our most common plan, had close to a 9% increase. So the insurance rates are going to be a little high. And GIC also eliminated a handful of plans, and they're making some changes. So open enrollment will be interesting this year because we have about 20 to 30 people that will have to switch plans. So open enrollment begins on April 5th and goes through May 3rd. And then we did talk about potentially negotiating GIC rates, and so we would have to make a decision on that. But we can make that at the next meeting. We can put a vote on the agenda for deciding what we're doing with GIC.
Can you repeat the percentage increase of the average?
Sure.
5 point,
5.7
thank you.
is the increase for the non-Medicare plans, the average, and 2.3 for the Medicare plans. But the Health New England plan is up closer to 9%. And that's our most popular. So our average may be a little higher than other groups' averages because of the number of people we have in Health New England. And that's all I have now, Jane. I'm all set.
Thank you. Jennifer?
So I was just, so the math on those changes, you say that you budgeted for 5% and that that 5.7 is the average, 2.3 for Medicare. So are you saying that, does that balance out? I know you said it's tight, or do you know, or you're not sure yet because you don't know the actual numbers, but you think that basically we didn't budget for enough of the increase?
When I budget for health insurance, I budget the 5%, and then I assume we're going to have some new employees that or new people pick up health insurance. So because open enrollment didn't happen yet, I don't know exactly which plans people are going to pick, but the amount of money I budgeted for those new employees has been eaten up by the increases.
I see.
Completely. So that's if people take the plan that I'm guessing that they're going to take. You know, and so we still need to wait and see where everybody lands, and we won't really know until October, November, when all the people start picking up plans, new employees come in, they pick up a plan, and their deductions start in November. So that's when we'll really know.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, thanks. The next item is school committee reports. The warrant subcommittee, we need a vote to approve 3 different warrants. And if it's acceptable, I will group them together. The first is a fiscal year 23 warrant number 3335 in the amount of $120,476.44. The second is warrant number 336 in the amount of $10,808.14. And the third is warrant number 337 in the amount of $9,116.40. And those details are in your packet if you'd like to look at the specifics. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Move it.
Bill, you,
Yeah.
I'll second it, Heather.
Jennifer, Heather, thank you. Any discussion of that? In that case, we'll have a roll call. Bill,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
and me. Yes, thank you. Moving on to the business section. The first item is reestablishing a transportation revolving fund. We need to vote that, and I think Joanne's going to give us a little information on that.
Hang on one second. Sorry, Jane. I was just going to request that, I don't know who's on it any longer and if you are still willing, but we did just get all those updates to policies from MASC, and I was going to
Yes.
suggest a meeting since it's been a while.
Yes, that is now on my radar. I put it at the top of my pile of things. So by next week, I'll have to look and see who else besides you and I are on the policy subcommittee. And a lot of them are small updates, but we really should do what we've done previous years and start at the beginning and go right through. And
Okay.
what we've done in the past is the policy subcommittee would meet. Heather would very efficiently type up the changes as we spoke about them, and we would present them to the committee to vote. Policies, if there's any change, we need to have 2 readings. Third reading is when we vote. So we'll try to start that up again and get working on updating. A lot of them are small updates, but it's important to keep up with them. So thank you. We will be doing that. Okay, Joanne, something about the transportation revolving fund.
Yes, so the transportation revolving fund, I believe it was initially implemented so that way if you had a surplus in one year and you were expecting a deficit in another year, you were able to hold the money aside for transportation, your revenues aside for transportation, and use them in the following year. But then once you start using this revolving fund, you know, you you sort of just stick with it, and then it doesn't become extra anymore. It just sort of becomes the way you do things. So we have been using the transportation reimbursement fund since fiscal 20. And so what we do is when we receive our revenue in the prior fiscal year, we're able to take some of that revenue, transfer it into this fund, and then use it next year as part of our budget building process, and then to pay the bills when we get them. And if it comes a time that we don't have enough funding in a year to do this, then we'll stop transferring it into the revolving fund and stop using this reimbursement fund. But for now, we are continuing to use it. So we did put this into the budget as part of our budget packet. We said we were going to use $200,000 from the transportation reimbursement fund. So we need to reestablish that fund each year. So we'll need a vote for that. And then we want to vote to transfer $200,000 from the general fund transportation reimbursement to the regional transportation reimbursement fund.
Okay, so I
And that's
believe
it.
you included the wording that you need in the motion.
Yes,
And
on
so,
my report.
okay, we'll need somebody to move that the Gill-Montague Regional School Committee reestablish a regional transportation reimbursement fund, and the proposed budget uses $200,000 from the regional transportation reimbursement fund to support the budget. Is that all you need in it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll entertain that motion.
Almost. Sorry.
Bill, thank you.
I'll second it.
And Nick, second. Any discussion of that? I think you encapsulated it, Joanne. Okay, we'll take a vote. Bill,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
and me. Yes, thank you.
Okay, and then we should also vote to transfer $200,000 into that fund.
Okay, and how would we like to word that?
It's
Just
from the
vote to
general fund.
transfer $200,000 from the general fund reimbursement, transportation reimbursement, into regional transportation reimbursement fund.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain that motion.
So moved.
Jennifer,
Okay, I got Jennifer and Heather. Will you second?
Of course.
All right, thank you. Any discussion of that part? All right, we'll take a vote. Bill,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Jennifer,
yes.
Nick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
and myself. Thank you. Next item we have is the discussion about the fiscal year 24 budget, and we will need to vote this evening, and we will need 6 members to vote in the affirmative because the vote for the budget requires a 2/3 as opposed to simply a quorum to vote in the affirmative. Okay, Joanne, you're up again.
Okay, in your packet is the vote language. So basically, let me pull it up because you can't really see it when I do that.
No, I can't.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again so that way we can all see this. Okay. So on this report, you can see all the different pieces of the budget that you're voting. So the all funds budget revenue that we use. So you're going to see at the top, you're going to see the general fund budget. So the total is in black, 23,595,806. So that is the revenue used to support the general fund budget. And then all the other funds that we use are here. So grants, transportation revolving, ESSER grant, circuit breaker, and school choice adds up to an all funds budget of the 27 million. The next section, oh gee, that didn't print out very good. That is the assessments. So the town of Montague and the town of Gill assessments. This is based on the town of Montague affordable assessment. So the assessments are there. And then the summary of the expenses based on the funds. So the general funds. And then the other funds that we use to support the budget. And then the vote language is down here. So what you're voting is the general fund budget. And in this vote, you do need to include language about the E and D. And so that you'll see up here in the revenues. We have excess and deficiency. We're using $400,000 to support the budget. And the vote language is on this sheet.
Okay. The vote needs to read, I move that the Gill-Montague Regional School Committee approve a fiscal year 2024 general fund budget of $23,595,806. This includes the use of $400,000 from E&D to support the budget. So I will entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Heather, thank you. Second,
I'll second it. Sorry, I couldn't unmute.
thank you, Jennifer. I have that problem. And any discussion about that before we vote?
So included in your packet also, and it'll be online, is a PowerPoint that takes everything that we had in prior PowerPoints earlier in the development of the budget and all the changes that we talked about last week, all put into a new PowerPoint for you. That,
And
along with the line item budget, is in your packet.
And that I was going to remind people who might be watching for the first time that we have had several meetings where we analyzed the PowerPoint and the line items and all of the information, and then the changes last time that we received.
Mhm.
John, did I see your hand?
Yeah, are we voting on the general fund or on the entire thing? I'm just wondering, it looks like that $200,000 transportation revolving that we just established is outside of the general fund. Is that correct?
Right, so you voted that already,
Okay.
and now you're just voting the general fund budget.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, we have a motion, we have a second, then I'll take a roll call. Bill,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
and me. Yes, thank you. So the budget is passed, and I will say just one comment. I forgot to make it when we were looking at transportation reimbursement. I believe, is this the first year we've gotten 90% reimbursement, Joanne?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's been some years recently during the pandemic, because transportation costs went down so much. So what the state does is they establish a dollar amount for transportation reimbursement,
Mhm.
and then they base the actual reimbursement on the cost that people report. And so during the pandemic, we weren't transporting students to school. And so we were saving some money on our transportation costs.
Right.
And so because we saved money, as did everybody in the state, the transportation reimbursement rate was 96% that year.
Okay. The reason it made I remembered when you were showing us the chart going way back, because when they had cut the amount to like 65%, I think, or 60, that was when I was early on, when I was on school committee, and I belonged to the state regionals group, and we were working to try to get the state to increase that reimbursement, and they sort of edged it up year by year, I believe, for a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep,
So
and
it is,
you can see that in that transportation handout that I had. There's a page that shows the transportation reimbursement rates
Right.
since fiscal 2008.
right. That reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, but because the transportation reimbursement is a year behind, right, Joanne?
Yes.
Mhm.
So when you have a good and it's also subject to appropriation, which is the cost effectiveness part of it.
Right.
but then you get into, because it lags a year, if you did well, we didn't make money, but if you did well because you had low transportation one year, then the following year, your reimbursement amount would be based on a lean year. So you pay every action has a reaction, and the reaction is that a year later, you're going to have a lower reimbursement amount, even if the rate is higher. But you get what I mean. I can see you're at least nodding in my favor. So thank you.
I get it. I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's just that I'd forgotten about how much we worked with the state to try to get them to increase regional transportation. And as Bill says, it was always subject to, it's still subject to appropriation. They can
Right.
say whatever percentage they want, and then they may not vote it at the legislative level.
Right. And that percentage is the way of them saying, you know, this is what the cost was last year. And so when they're building the transportation for fiscal 24, they're saying in fiscal 21 or in fiscal 22, that was the total cost. So based on that total cost with inflation, we think we can afford 90% next year. So they say it's going to be this dollar amount, and we think that's going to be about 90%. And then when all of the end of year reports come in and everybody's reported how much money they spent in fiscal 23, then they'll figure out what exactly that percentage rate is going to be.
Right.
And maybe it'll be 90%, maybe it'll be a little bit less or a little bit more, but they at least try to estimate where they think it's going to be.
It was always an interesting exercise to get that worked out. Yep. Okay, moving on in the business portion of the meeting, we need to discuss and approve the 2023-2024 school year calendar. And Brian has included the updated version. Does that include today's day off, Brian?
No, this is next year's calendar. Next
all right.
school year. The updated version of the other calendar.
Right, I'm just kidding you.
Okay. I did want to mention that I did, as I had indicated in the previous meeting, have the opportunity to run it past the union, even though we're not required to. And the feedback that we got from union leadership was that it looked good to them. So I just wanted to share that with the committee. But each year, the school committee needs to approve the school year calendar in March.
Okay. Are there any particular changes since we looked at it last time, Brian? I don't think so, are there?
No, I didn't. The administrative team, when the administrative team met prior to the last school committee meeting, we did make some changes to it as a team, but this is the version that I brought to the school committee last week.
Okay. In that case, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move it, Bill.
I'll second it, Jennifer.
Bill and Jennifer, and then any discussion before we take the vote? Okay, we'll have a roll call then. Bill,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
and me. Thank you. That's unanimous. And the last item under business is the Sheffield Statement of Interest discussion. And you will see there are 4 different building condition assessments included in your packet this evening. Joanne?
Yes, so we are putting together the actual document, the statement of interest document that needs to be submitted to MSBA. And all of these building condition assessments will be included in our submission, as will the educational plan. So that report was not ready for you at this meeting, and so we will continue to get it together and bring it to you at your next meeting.
But the idea was too that over the course of the last meeting and this meeting, we wanted to share those pieces of items that will be included in the statement of interest in advance. So it wasn't like you were getting, a 200-page report and being asked to vote on it all at once without at least having access to some of the major sections. And so the building condition assessments, as well as the educational plan that Gene Powers shared last time, are really significant portions of the statements of interest.
Judging from the amount that you've given us previously and this amount of pages, it's going to be a really thick document when you submit it.
It's going to be electronic.
Yeah, fortunately, it'd be heavy to mail. So those are there for people to look at. And certainly when you look at them, if you have any questions about the information that we've got from those condition assessments, please don't hesitate, check in with Joanne, and we will be talking about the statement of interest at the next meeting, correct?
That's right.
Yep.
Very
We will
good.
have that document for you, and then you'll talk about it in the vote, Brian.
Our intent was to have it voted on March 28th if possible,
Okay.
simply because the deadline for us to submit it is April 14th. And Jane, as the chair, if it's approved by the school committee, does need to do an electronic signature. And so we wanted to make sure that we had enough space and time to be able to do that and weren't pushing to the last minute.
Okay, makes sense. So that will come back for us. The next item, there are no minutes to approve at the moment, but I know our new administrative assistant is working very hard on getting the minutes together from some previous meetings, even before she joined us. There was a bit of a gap. So I appreciate her working on those, and she'll bring them into our next packet as soon as she is able. And agenda requests, as always, Bill and Brian and I will be meeting or by Tuesday of the week before our next meeting. And so if you have any agenda requests, please let us know. The next meeting is March 28th, and the following one after that is April 11th. And that seems to be it for this evening. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move it.
Okay, Nick, thank you.
Second, Jennifer.
And Jennifer, thank you. I think we're earlier this evening. That makes up for a couple of longer meetings. We'll take a roll call to adjourn, Bill.
No, I can't say no. Yes.
That's right. Let's just keep going here. Heather,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
and myself. Yes. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.